Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Roland Pierce stood at the window of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline blur through the rain. At 45, he was a man who had built everything from nothing, a construction empire that stretched across 3 states, a reputation forged in concrete and steel. His weathered hands, scarred from his early days swinging hammers, now signed contracts worth millions. 22 years ago, he'd married Brenda Stark, a beautiful college sophomore who'd been impressed by his ambition when he was just a hungry contractor with a single crew. She'd been his anchor, his motivation to climb higher. Or so he believed. Their son Keith was graduating from Stanford with a degree in civil engineering, following in Roland's footsteps. At 21, Keith had his father's sharp mind, but his mother's softer features. Roland had poured everything into giving his son opportunities he'd never had. The graduation dinner was set for tomorrow night at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Brenda had insisted on inviting her brother Doug Stark, a failed businessman who'd been living off Roland's generosity for years. Doug's bitter resentment toward Roland's success was poorly hidden behind forced smiles and backhanded compliments. Roland's phone buzzed. A text from Brenda. Working late again. Don't wait up. He frowned. She'd been working late frequently at her job as a real estate agent. When he'd started Pierce Construction, Brenda had been his bookkeeper, his partner in building their future. But success had changed her. She'd grown distant, critical, embarrassed by his rough edges despite the fortune they'd built together. That evening, Roland sat alone in their mansion in Bellevue, eating takeout Chinese food. The house felt hollow, filled with expensive furniture, but empty of warmth. Keith was still in California, finishing his final exams. The silence pressed against Roland's ears like a weight. He'd worked 16-hour days for 2 decades, missing little league games and school plays, all to give his family everything. But lately, he wondered if he'd build a fortune while losing what mattered most. Roland's phone rang. Keith's name flashed on the screen. "Dad, I've been working on my speech for tomorrow. I want it to be perfect. Your speech for the dinner. Mom said I should say something to thank everyone who supported me." Roland smiled, the first genuine one in weeks. "You don't need to thank anyone, son. You earned this." "I know, but..." Keith paused. "Dad, there are some things I need to say. Some truths that need to come out." "What kind of truths?" "You'll understand tomorrow. I want you to know that no matter what happens, you're the man I want to become. Not perfect, but real. Honest." The line went quiet for a moment. "Keith, I love you, Dad. Remember that tomorrow, okay?" After Keith hung up, Roland stared at the phone. Something in his son's tone unsettled him, but he pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to pre-graduation nerves. Chapter 2. The Speech That Changed Everything. The Fairmont Olympics' private dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Roland adjusted his tie, uncomfortable in the formal setting despite owning companies that had built half the luxury hotels in the city. He preferred job sites to banquet halls. Brenda arrived looking stunning in a black cocktail dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled. But her smile seemed forced, her eyes avoiding his. Doug Stark shuffled in behind her, already nursing a scotch despite the early hour. "Keith's running a bit late," Brenda announced, checking her phone. He texted that he'd be here by 7. Roland noticed how she clutched her phone, protective and secretive. When had she become so guarded? Other guests filtered in, a few of Roland's business associates, Brenda's real estate colleagues, and some family friends. The conversation flowed around Roland, but he felt disconnected, watching his wife laugh at jokes that weren't funny and touch arms that weren't his. Keith arrived at 7 sharp, wearing a navy suit that made him look older, more serious. He hugged his father tightly. "Ready for this, son?" Keith's jaw was set with determination. More than ready. During dinner, Roland watched his family. Doug dominated conversation with stories about his latest failed ventures, always hinting that Roland should invest. Brenda laughed too loudly at everything, her nervous energy filling the room. As dessert was served, Keith stood up, tapping his wine glass. "I'd like to say a few words." The room quieted. Keith pulled folded notes from his jacket pocket. 4 years ago, when I started college, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about money, status, impressing people. He glanced at his mother, who smiled encouragingly. But I learned something different. I learned that real success is about integrity, about being the same person whether others are watching or not. Roland felt a strange tension building in the room. Keith continued, I want to thank the person who taught me that lesson through his example, even when he didn't know anyone was watching. Dad, you built everything we have with your bare hands and honest work. Brenda's smile faltered slightly. She reached for Keith's notes. That's lovely, honey, but maybe... Keith pulled the papers away. Mom, let me finish. This next part is important. The room fell silent. Roland's hands clenched involuntarily. I also learned that the people closest to you can hurt you the deepest. That sometimes the people who benefit most from your sacrifice are the ones who respect you the least. Brenda's face went pale. Keith, what are you? 3 months ago, I came home early from school for spring break. I wanted to surprise everyone. Keith's voice remained steady, but his eyes were hard. I found Mom at our house with Gregory Blake, her real estate partner. They weren't reviewing property listings. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Roland felt the world tilt. I stood in our kitchen and listened to them plan their future together. Heard them laugh about how Dad was too focused on work to notice what was happening under his own roof. Gregory called Dad a dumb contractor who got lucky. Brenda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Keith, stop this right now. You're embarrassing. Embarrassing who, Mom? Keith's voice cut through her protest. The way you've been embarrassing Dad for months? Doug Stark shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed. Kid, maybe family business should stay. Family business? Keith turned to his uncle with cold eyes. You mean like how you've been encouraging Mom's affair because you thought Gregory would invest in your schemes once he and Mom were together? The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Roland sat frozen, watching his life implode in real time. Keith wasn't finished. Uncle Doug, you called Dad a stupid blue-collar guy who didn't deserve what he'd built. You said Mom was smart to find someone more sophisticated. Brenda was trembling now, tears streaming down her face. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Keith folded his notes carefully. I understand that Dad worked his whole life to give us everything, and you repaid him by betraying him with someone who sees him as beneath them. Roland finally found his voice, though it came out as a whisper. How long? Keith looked at his father with sad eyes. 8 months, Dad. Maybe longer. The room had gone dead silent, except for Brenda's quiet sobbing. Roland's vision narrowed to a pinpoint. Everything he'd built, everything he believed in, reduced to ashes in his son's measured words. He stood slowly, his chair falling backward. Without looking at anyone, he walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the wreckage of his life. Chapter 3. The Reckoning Begins. Roland drove through the night, his mind a white-hot furnace of rage and calculation. He ended up at his first construction site, a small office building in Tacoma that he'd built 18 years ago. The security guard recognized him and waved him through. Standing in the shadow of concrete and steel that bore his signature, Roland felt something crystallize inside him. He'd been a fool, but he wouldn't be a victim. His phone rang constantly. Brenda, Doug, even some of the dinner guests. He ignored them all except one. Dad, Keith's voice was tentative. Are you safe? I'm at a hotel. Dad, I'm sorry I had to. Don't apologize. You did what I should have done months ago. Roland's voice was steady now, cold as winter steel. You chose a side. I won't forget that. What are you going to do? Roland stared at the building he'd created from nothing. I'm going to remind some people who they're dealing with. He hung up and made his first call to Marcus Webb, a private investigator who'd helped him with business disputes. Marcus answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Roland? What's wrong? I need to know everything about Gregory Blake. Bank records, business dealings, personal history. Everything. When you need it. Yesterday. Roland's second call was to his lawyer, Darren Page, a ruthless corporate attorney who'd helped him crush competitors in court. Darren, I need to know the exact legal requirements for divorce in Washington state. Asset protection, custody implications, everything. Jesus, Roland. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be thorough. By dawn, Roland sat in his office with a pot of black coffee and a legal pad. He'd built an empire by outworking and outthinking his competition. Now he had new opponents. Marcus arrived at 8 with a thick folder. Gregory Blake, 38, divorced, no kids. He's leveraged to the hilt. Big mortgage, car payments, credit card debt. His real estate business is struggling. He's been padding his income by skimming from client accounts. Roland studied the financial records. How much? About $60,000 over 6 months. Small amounts, easy to hide unless someone looks carefully. Who's been looking? Nobody yet. But the State Real Estate Commission does random audits. He's due for one soon. Roland smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. What else? His ex-wife filed a restraining order 2 years ago. Domestic violence charges that were dropped when she moved out of state. Send me everything. Darren arrived an hour later with divorce papers already drafted. I've structured this to protect your business assets. Pierce Construction stays yours, but she'll fight for the house, cars, personal accounts. Let her fight. How long does the process take? If contested, 6 months to a year. If she agrees to terms. She won't agree. Roland's eyes were flat and cold. She'll try to take half of everything I built. But she's about to learn something about me she should have figured out 20 years ago. What's that? I don't lose. Roland spent the morning making calls. To his foreman, Lewis Marshall, giving him temporary authority over construction sites. To his accountant, moving liquid assets to protected accounts. To his security chief, installing cameras and changing locks at all properties. At noon, Brenda finally showed up at his office. She looked haggard, her makeup smeared from crying. Roland, we need to talk. No, we don't. He didn't look up from his papers. Please. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. His voice was conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. You've been sleeping with Gregory Blake for 8 months. You and your brother have been planning your exit strategy. You think I'm too stupid to see it coming. Brenda sat down uninvited. I never called you stupid. No, you just laughed when Gregory did. She flinched. I made a mistake. No. Roland finally looked at her, and she recoiled for what she saw in his eyes. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Now you live with the consequences. The consequences? Roland slid the divorce papers across his desk. You have 48 hours to find a lawyer and respond to these. Everything you need to know is in there. Brenda picked up the papers with shaking hands. You can't just. I can do whatever I want. I built this life. I can tear it down just as easily. He leaned back in his chair. But before I do, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you and Gregory really are. What does that mean? Roland's smile was razor thin. You'll find out. That evening, Roland sat in his empty house, making a list. Not a grocery list or to-do list, but something far more important. A list of everyone who had betrayed him, enabled the betrayal, or would try to profit from his destruction. Brenda's name was at the top, followed by Gregory Blake and Doug Stark. But there were others, mutual friends who'd probably known about the affair, business associates who might try to take advantage of his personal turmoil, anyone who thought Roland Pierce could be counted out. They were all about to learn why he'd risen from a carpenter's helper to owning a construction empire worth $50 million. It hadn't been luck or timing. It had been because he never, ever forgot who helped him climb and who tried to push him down. Chapter 4. Foundations and Fractures. Roland's investigation into Gregory Blake's business practices bore fruit faster than expected. Marcus Webb had a contact in the State Real Estate Commission, and a few carefully placed phone calls accelerated Gregory's scheduled audit by 3 months. They'll be knocking on his door Monday morning, Marcus reported. When they find the missing client funds, it'll trigger criminal charges. How long does he have? Maybe a week to cover the gap before they notice. But he doesn't have $60,000 liquid. His credit's maxed out. Roland nodded. Phase 1 was elegant. Let Gregory destroy himself with his own greed. But it was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Roland had his accountant freeze joint accounts and transfer funds to business entities that Brenda couldn't touch. She'd be shopping for lawyers with whatever cash she had in her purse. Keith returned from California that weekend, moving into a corporate apartment Roland kept for visiting executives. Father and son sat in Roland's study, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. "I keep thinking I should have told you sooner," Keith said. "You were protecting me. I understand that." Roland poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "But now I need to know everything. Every detail you remember." Keith's jaw tightened. "Gregory wasn't just sleeping with Mom. He was planning to steal your clients. I heard them talking about starting their own construction company once they got access to your business contacts." "Ow! Mom has copies of all your client lists, vendor contracts, everything. She's been feeding information to Gregory for months." Roland felt the familiar cold rage settle in his chest. Corporate espionage on top of adultery. What else? Uncle Doug has been gambling again. Heavy losses. That's why he's been pushing Mom toward Gregory. He owes people money and thought Gregory would help pay his debts. "How much does Doug owe?" "I heard him mention 40,000 to someone on the phone." He sounded scared. Roland filed that information away. Doug's desperation made him vulnerable, and vulnerable people made mistakes. Sunday evening, Brenda showed up at the house with her divorce attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Melanie McFarland who specialized in high-asset divorces. "Mr. Pierce, my client is willing to negotiate a reasonable settlement." "Your client gets nothing." Roland cut her off. "She violated our prenuptial agreement by committing adultery. She forfeits all claims to marital assets." McFarland smiled thinly. "Prenups can be challenged, especially 20-year-old ones. Times change, circumstances. The circumstances are that your client is a cheating whore who's been stealing from my business." Roland's crude language was calculated, designed to provoke a reaction. Brenda burst into tears. "Roland, please. Save it for someone who cares." McFarland bristled. "That language is completely inappropriate." "So, is adultery." Roland stood up. "You have 2 days to review the prenup and applicable law. After that, we settle this in court." After they left, Roland made another call to Marcus Webb. "I need surveillance on Doug Stark. Who he meets, where he goes, who he owes money to. You thinking of helping him out with his debts?" In a manner of speaking, Monday morning brought the expected chaos. Gregory Blake's real estate office was swarmed by state investigators, seizing computers and files. By noon, news of his embezzlement charges was spreading through Seattle's real estate community like wildfire. Brenda called Roland in hysterics. "They arrested Gregory. This is your doing." "Is it? I thought honest businessmen didn't get arrested for embezzlement." "You're destroying an innocent man." "Innocent?" Roland's laugh was harsh. 60,000 in stolen client funds says otherwise. "But don't worry. I'm sure you can visit him in county jail." That evening, Roland received an unexpected visitor. Sally Clay, Brenda's longtime friend and fellow real estate agent, stood nervously in his office lobby. "Roland, I need to talk to you." "About what?" "About Brenda and Gregory. There are things you don't know." Roland's interest sharpened. Sally had been Brenda's confidant for years. "What things? Can we speak privately?" They went to his office. Sally accepted a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "I tried to warn Brenda that she was making a mistake, but she wouldn't listen. She said you'd never find out because you were too busy working to notice anything." "How long have you known?" "Since it started. Maybe 10 months ago." Sally's voice was barely a whisper. "But Roland, there's something else. Something worse." "Tell me." "Brenda's been planning to leave you for over a year. She's been systematically copying your business files, taking photos of contracts, building a client database. She and Gregory weren't just having an affair. They were planning to start a competing construction company." Roland's hands clenched. "Using my clients and contacts." "Yes, and there's more. Doug's gambling debts aren't random. He's been betting on inside information about your construction projects, completion dates, cost overruns, permit delays. Someone's been feeding him information to sell to competitors." "Who?" Sally met his eyes. "Brenda." The room went silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Roland processed this new betrayal, adding it to his growing list of grievances. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Gregory's arrest changed everything. Brenda's panicking, making threats. She said if you destroy her, she'll destroy you too." She knows things about your business that could hurt you. What things? I don't know specifics, but she mentioned safety violations, unpermitted work, bribes to city officials. She's been documenting everything, building a case against you. Roland stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city he'd helped build. Sally, I want you to do something for me. What? I want you to stay close to Brenda. Let her think you're supporting her. But I need to know what she's planning, who she's talking to, what information she has. You want me to spy on my friend? I want you to choose a side. Because this is about to get much worse, and there won't be room for neutral parties. Sally stared at him for a long moment, seeing something in his expression that made her decision. What do you need me to do? Chapter 5. The Web Titans. By Tuesday, Gregory Blake was out on bail, but his business was finished. The Real Estate Commission had suspended his license pending criminal proceedings, and word of his embezzlement had spread through the industry. No reputable firm would touch him. More importantly, he was desperate for money. $60,000 to cover the stolen funds, legal fees mounting daily, and his expensive lifestyle suddenly unsustainable. Desperate men made predictable choices. Roland's phone rang at noon. Unknown number. Pierce? This is Gregory Blake. I wonder when you'd call. We need to talk. Man to man. About what? About making this situation go away. I have information you want. You have resources I need. Roland smiled. What kind of information? About your wife. About your business. Things that could hurt you if they came out wrong. Is that a threat? It's an opportunity. For both of us. Roland agreed to meet at a diner in Renton, neutral ground away from prying eyes. He arrived early, choosing a corner booth with clear sight lines. Gregory walked in 10 minutes later, looking haggard and desperate. You look like shit, Roland observed as Gregory sat down. Funny what happens when your life implodes overnight. I wouldn't know. My life's been pretty stable lately. Gregory ordered coffee with shaking hands. Look, I know you orchestrated the audit. Don't insult my intelligence by denying it. I don't deny things that are true. Fine. You want your pound of flesh, you got it. My career's over. I'm facing criminal charges, my reputation's shot. But if you think that's enough, you're wrong. Roland leaned back. What do you want? 100,000. Cash. In exchange, I disappear. No trial testimony about Brenda. No exposing your business practices. No competing construction company. My business practices? Gregory's smile was ugly. Brenda's been documenting everything for months. Safety violations, unpermitted additions, bribes to building inspectors. She's got photos, recorded conversations, copies of altered permits. Enough to bury you with the city and the feds. Roland felt a cold fury building. And if I don't pay, I go to the prosecutors with everything. Turn state's evidence in exchange for immunity. Your wife becomes a very cooperative witness against the construction company that's been cutting corners for years. Interesting theory. One problem. What's that? I don't cut corners. I don't bribe inspectors. And I don't alter permits. Roland's voice was deadly quiet. So whatever Brenda thinks she has, it's either fabricated or planted. Gregory's confidence wavered. She's got evidence. She's got bullshit. But thanks for confirming that my wife has been trying to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. That's extremely useful information. Roland stood up. Here's my counteroffer. You get nothing. You face your charges like a man. And if you or Brenda try to make false accusations against my company, I'll make your current problems look like a parking ticket. You can't just watch me. That evening, Roland met with Darren Page to discuss Gregory's blackmail attempt. If he's telling the truth about fabricated evidence, we need to get ahead of this, Darren warned. False accusations can be as damaging as real ones. Can we get a search warrant for Brenda's files? Not without probable cause. But there might be another way. What? A sting operation. Get her to admit she's fabricating evidence. Record the conversation. That would give us leverage and criminal charges against her. Roland considered this. Ow! Use someone she trusts. Someone who can get her talking. Sally Clay's face came to mind. I might have someone. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb had been busy investigating Doug Stark's gambling debts. The news wasn't good. He owes $43,000 to Eddie Torino, a loan shark who doesn't negotiate payment plans. Doug's been trying to borrow against your sister-in-law's future divorce settlement, but nobody's stupid enough to take that bet. How much time does he have? Based on Torino's reputation? Not much. Doug's already had one warning, a broken finger 2 weeks ago. Roland filed this information away. Doug's desperation was about to become very useful. Wednesday evening, Sally Clay called Brenda with a carefully rehearsed story about wanting to help. She suggested they meet for drinks to plan Brenda's legal strategy. Roland listened to the conversation through a wire Sally was wearing, courtesy of Marcus Webb surveillance equipment. I still can't believe Roland's being so vindictive, Brenda complained over her third glass of wine. After everything I've done for him, for his business. What do you mean? Sally prompted. I covered for him for years. The corner cutting, the bribes, the safety violations. I kept his secrets and protected his reputation. Are you talking about actual violations? Or some were real, some I had to create evidence for. If this goes to court, I need ammunition. Roland thinks he can steamroll me because I'm just his ignorant wife, but I documented everything. Documented how? Photos, recordings, altered paperwork. I made it look like Roland was cutting corners and bribing inspectors even when he wasn't. I needed leverage for the divorce. Sally almost choked on her drink. You fabricated evidence against your own husband? I'm not stupid, Sally. Roland built a $50 million company by being ruthless. I learned from the master. The recording was clear, incriminating, and legally admissible. Brenda had just confessed to conspiracy, evidence tampering, and fraud. Roland turned off the receiver and smiled. His wife had always underestimated him, mistaking his blue-collar background for stupidity. She was about to learn the difference between intelligence and education. But he wasn't finished with her yet. Phase 2 of his plan was just beginning, and it would require patience, precision, and a willingness to be more ruthless than anyone expected. Because Roland Pierce never forgave betrayal, and he was just getting started. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. Thursday morning brought unexpected visitors to Roland's office. 2 FBI agents, credentials gleaming, wearing serious expressions and cheap suits. Mr. Pierce? Agent Bradley Clark, Agent Edwin Little. We'd like to ask you some questions about your business practices. Roland's secretary buzzed his lawyer immediately, but he kept his expression neutral. What kind of questions? We've received allegations about possible federal contract violations, safety regulation breaches, and bribery of public officials. I see. And who made these allegations? Agent Clark consulted his notes. We're not at liberty to say, but the informant provided substantial documentation. Darren Page arrived within minutes, and the interview was postponed until afternoon. As soon as the agents left, Roland called Marcus Webb. Brenda moved faster than expected. She's gone to the feds. With fabricated evidence? Probably, but they have to investigate once a complaint is filed. This was the moment Roland had been preparing for. He'd spent 20 years building his company by the book specifically because he'd grown up watching crooked contractors get destroyed by legal problems. Every permit was legitimate, every safety protocol followed, every penny of taxes paid. But Brenda didn't know that. She thought she was married to a man who cut corners like her father had, a small-time builder who'd lost everything to regulatory violations when Brenda was 15. At 2 p.m., Roland and Darren sat across from the FBI agents in a sterile conference room. Mr. Pierce, we need to ask about specific projects, Agent Clark began. The Meridian Office Complex, the Harbor View Apartments, the Bellevue Medical Center. Roland answered every question with documentation. Permits, inspection reports, safety certifications, financial records. Everything legitimate, everything properly filed. These reports contradict the allegations we received, Agent Little admitted after 2 hours. What allegations specifically? Darren pressed. Bribery of building inspector Kenny Ackerman, falsified safety reports, use of substandard materials on federal projects. Roland almost smiled. Kenny Ackerman was one of the most honest inspectors in the state, incorruptible and thorough. Anyone who tried to bribe him would be in federal prison. Agent Clark, I've never offered a bribe to any public official. My company's safety record is publicly available through OSHA, and our material specifications are verified by independent testing labs. Then how do you explain these photographs and recordings? They showed Roland images printed from digital files, photos of cash allegedly changing hands, documents with falsified signatures, recordings of conversations that sounded like bribery negotiations. Roland studied them carefully. Professional quality, but clearly fabricated. These are fake. Can you prove that? Can you prove they're real? Darren interjected. Chain of custody, digital forensics, verification of authenticity? The agents exchanged glances. We're still investigating. Then we're done here until you have real evidence, Darren said, standing. Outside the FBI field office, Roland made his next move. He called Kenny Ackerman directly. Kenny, it's Roland Pierce. I need to ask you something important. Has anyone approached you recently about taking bribes or falsifying inspection reports? Actually, yes. Some woman called last week asking detailed questions about our inspection procedures. Said she was writing an article about construction safety. Seemed fishy. What did you tell her? Nothing useful. But Roland, if someone's trying to frame you for bribery, you should know I keep audio recordings of all my inspections. Digital files, time-stamped, stored on secure servers. Anyone who claims I took bribes is lying. Roland smiled. I might need copies of those recordings. For you? Anything. That evening, Sally Clay made another approach to Brenda, this time suggesting they meet at Brenda's house to plan her legal strategy. Roland's surveillance team was already in position. The FBI visit spooked me, Brenda admitted as they sat in her living room. I thought they'd arrest Roland immediately, but his lawyer was too smooth. Maybe the evidence isn't as strong as you thought. It's strong enough. I spent months creating a paper trail, documenting every way Roland cuts corners. But if Roland isn't actually cutting corners, it doesn't matter. Brenda's voice turned sharp. Perception is reality in federal court. Once they start investigating, his reputation is destroyed. His business partners will run. His clients will cancel contracts. His company will implode. Even if he's innocent, especially if he's innocent. Innocent people fight back, which means years of legal bills, media attention, and corporate death by 1,000 cuts. Sally shifted uncomfortably. Brenda, what if Roland finds out you fabricated evidence? He won't. I used Gregory's connections to create the fake documents. Professional quality, untraceable to me. And Gregory's okay with this? Brenda's smile was cold. Gregory's facing 5 years in federal prison. He'll do whatever I ask if it helps his case. What Brenda didn't know was that Gregory Blake was sitting in Marcus Webb's office at that very moment, cutting a deal to save his own skin. She's completely unhinged, Gregory told Marcus. The affair was one thing, but she's talking about destroying Roland's life, taking his company, ruining his reputation. Why the change of heart? Because I'm facing real criminal charges, and she's asking me to commit more crimes to cover for her fake evidence. I may be a thief, but I'm not stupid. Marcus slid a cooperation agreement across the desk. Sign this, and the DA will recommend reduced charges. All you have to do is testify truthfully about Brenda's plans. Gregory signed without hesitation. By Friday evening, Roland had everything he needed. Recorded confessions, expert analysis proving the evidence was fabricated, witness statements from Kenny Ackerman, and Gregory Blake's cooperation. But he wasn't ready to spring the trap yet. Brenda had committed multiple felonies, but she wasn't the only target. Doug Stark had been feeding her information, profiting from insider knowledge, and using family access to gather intelligence for competitors. Roland wanted them all. Saturday morning, he made a call to Eddie Torino, the loan shark Doug owed money to. Marcus had arranged the introduction through mutual contacts in the construction industry. Mr. Torino, I understand Doug Stark owes you money. 43 grand plus interest. Why? I might be interested in purchasing his debt. You want to collect from your own brother-in-law? I want to own his debt. There's a difference. They met that afternoon at a restaurant in Georgetown. Torino was exactly what Roland expected. Expensive suit, gold jewelry, eyes like a shark. 43,000 principal, another 12 in interest and fees. 55 total. I'll pay 60,000 for the debt and your silence about the transaction. Deal. But why pay extra? Roland's smile was winter cold. Because I want Doug to know exactly who owns him now. Sunday evening, Doug Stark answered his door to find Roland standing on his porch, holding a manila envelope. We need to talk. Doug's face went pale. Roland, I can explain. Shut up and listen. Roland handed him the envelope. Open it. Inside were copies of Doug's gambling debts, now legally assigned to Roland Pierce Construction. You owe me $55,000. Payment is due immediately. I don't have that kind of money. I know, but I have a payment plan in mind. What kind of payment plan? Roland's eyes were flat and cold. The kind where you do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, for as long as I tell you. Starting with a phone call to your sister. Doug's hand shook as he held the papers. What phone call? The one where you convince Brenda to accept my divorce settlement. $50,000 cash, the house, and joint custody of Keith. She'll never agree to that. She's planning to take half of everything. Then you'd better be very persuasive. Because if she doesn't sign those papers by Wednesday, I'm going to start collecting my debt in ways that will make Eddie Torino look like a Sunday school teacher. Doug stared at Roland with newfound terror. The mild-mannered contractor he'd dismissed as a pushover was gone. In his place stood a man capable of calculated violence. You're not who I thought you were, Doug whispered. No, Roland agreed. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just never bother to look past the work clothes and calloused hands. Roland turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Doug, if you warn Brenda about any of this, if you tell her about the debt transfer or the FBI evidence, I'll make sure you disappear completely. Permanently. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Doug Stark finally understood who he'd been gambling against. And Roland Pierce never lost. Chapter 7. The Noose Tightens. Monday morning, Doug Stark called his sister with shaking hands. Roland listened to the conversation through surveillance equipment, watching his brother-in-law's terror translate into desperate persuasion. Brenda, you need to take Roland's settlement offer. Are you insane? I'm going to get half of everything in court. No, you're not. He's got lawyers, investigators, connections you don't understand. Take the money and run. Doug, what's wrong? You sound scared. I am scared. For both of us. But Brenda was too arrogant to listen. She hung up, convinced that her fabricated evidence would destroy Roland in federal court. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Tuesday afternoon, Agent Bradley Clark called Roland personally. Mr. Pierce, we've completed our forensic analysis of the evidence provided by the informant. We need to discuss our findings. This time, the meeting was at the FBI field office in a more formal setting. Roland and Darren sat across from a full team of investigators. The photographs and recordings have been digitally manipulated, Agent Clark announced. Professional work, but detectable under forensic analysis. The documents contain forged signatures and falsified timestamps. So, my client is cleared of all allegations? Darren asked. More than that, we're treating this as a federal crime. Providing false evidence to federal agents, conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud if digital communications were involved. Agent Little leaned forward. Mr. Pierce, we believe your wife fabricated this evidence to harm you personally and professionally. We'd like your cooperation in building a case against her. Roland pretended to consider this. What kind of cooperation? Controlled contact, recorded conversations. Help us build an airtight case. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my company's reputation. What the FBI didn't know was that Roland already had everything they needed. But letting them build their own case would add federal charges to Brenda's legal problems. Wednesday morning, Brenda received a call from her divorce attorney with devastating news. The FBI cleared Roland of all allegations. Worse, they've opened a criminal investigation into who provided the false evidence. That's impossible. The evidence was solid. The evidence was fabricated, and they can prove it. Brenda, you need to tell me right now if you had anything to do with creating false documents. Brenda's silence was admission enough. Jesus Christ, do you understand what you've done? Federal charges, disbarment for me, if they think I knew, criminal conspiracy. They can't prove anything. They don't have to. They have digital forensics, witness statements, and a paper trail leading straight to you. Melanie McFarland quit as Brenda's attorney that afternoon, leaving her scrambling to find new representation. But word had spread through Seattle's legal community. Brenda Pierce was radioactive. That evening, Brenda called Roland in desperation. "We need to talk. About everything. I thought we'd said everything we needed to say. Roland, please. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work things out. The only thing we need to work out is your plea bargain. Plea bargain for the federal charges you're about to face. False evidence, conspiracy, wire fraud. You're looking at 5 to 10 years. The line went quiet. Roland, I never meant. You never meant to get caught. Please, I'll sign whatever divorce settlement you want. I'll disappear, start over somewhere else. Just make this go away. I can't make federal charges disappear, but I might be willing to limit the scope of my cooperation with investigators. What do you want? Full confession, recorded statement admitting you fabricated evidence and attempted to frame me. Complete disclosure of Gregory's involvement. And you sign over all claims to marital assets. That's everything. That's what happens when you try to destroy an innocent man." Thursday morning, Brenda sat in Roland's office with a court reporter giving a full confession under oath. She admitted to fabricating evidence, bribing Gregory Blake's cooperation with promises of shared divorce proceeds, and conspiring to destroy Roland's business reputation. The recording was devastating, comprehensive, and legally binding. But Roland wasn't finished with her yet. "There's one more thing I need," he told her after the court reporter left. "What?" "Information about who helped you, who knew about the affair, who encouraged the evidence fabrication, who planned to profit from my downfall." Brenda's face went pale. "I can't." "You can and you will. Because those people are accessories to federal crimes, and I want all of them. Roland, some of these people are our friends. Our friends." Roland's laugh was harsh. "Brenda, anyone who helped you try to destroy me was never my friend. They were vultures waiting for my corpse to feed on." Over the next hour, Brenda provided names, dates, and details. Sally Clay had been secretly recording their conversations on Roland's behalf, but others hadn't been so wise. 3 of Brenda's real estate colleagues had known about the affair and encouraged the evidence fabrication. 2 of their mutual friends had been promised business opportunities once Roland's company collapsed. Roland added each name to his list, planning separate reckonings for each betrayer. Friday afternoon, he received a call from Kenny Ackerman with interesting news. "Roland, you remember that woman who called asking about inspection procedures? The one who seemed fishy. I did some checking with other inspectors. She called all of them, asking detailed questions about bribery procedures, how someone might falsify inspection reports, what documentation would be most convincing. Building a how-to manual for evidence fabrication." Exactly. But here's the interesting part. She wasn't the only one. Gregory Blake called 2 weeks earlier, asking similar questions. Roland smiled. Gregory's cooperation with federal investigators was about to become much less valuable. His participation in evidence fabrication made him a co-conspirator, not just a witness. Saturday evening, Roland met with Keith at a steakhouse in downtown Seattle. Father and son sat in a quiet corner booth, finally able to speak freely. "How do you feel about everything that's happened?" Roland asked. Keith considered the question carefully. "Angry, disappointed, but not surprised. Not surprised. Mom's been changing for years, getting more bitter, more entitled. I think she convinced herself that she deserved more than what she had. And what about me? Do I deserve what I built?" Keith met his father's eyes. "You worked for every dollar, every contract, every success. You earned everything through honest effort. What she tried to do to you was unforgivable." Roland nodded. "What happens next won't be pretty. Your mother's going to prison, Gregory's life is destroyed, your Uncle Doug is going to have some difficult years ahead." "Good," Keith said simply. "They made their choices. You might be called to testify in federal court. I'll tell the truth. All of it." Roland raised his glass. "To family. Real family." Keith clinked his glass against his father's. "To justice." But justice, Roland knew, was more than just legal consequences. Real justice was comprehensive, personal, and permanent. The legal system would handle Brenda, Gregory, and the evidence fabrication. Roland would handle everything else. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Expands. The following Monday brought a cascade of consequences that rippled through Seattle's business community like an earthquake. Federal prosecutors announced charges against Brenda Pierce, Gregory Blake, and 3 associates for conspiracy to provide false evidence to federal agents. But Roland's private justice was just beginning. His first target was Joan Macias, Brenda's real estate colleague who had known about the affair for months and actively encouraged the evidence fabrication. Joan had been promised a lucrative partnership in the construction company that Brenda and Gregory planned to start with Roland's stolen client list. Roland's approach was surgical and devastating. Through Marcus Webb's investigations, he discovered that Joan had been skimming money from her real estate clients' escrow accounts. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but totaling nearly $30,000 over 2 years. She's been floating short-term loans to herself using client funds, Marcus reported, replacing the money before closing, but it's still felony embezzlement. Roland made a single phone call to the State Real Estate Commission. Within 48 hours, Joan Macias was under investigation, her license suspended, and her career effectively over. But Roland wasn't satisfied with professional destruction. Joan had children in expensive private schools, a mortgage on a house she couldn't afford, and a lifestyle built on borrowed money. When her real estate income disappeared, the financial dominoes would fall quickly. Roland bought Joan's mortgage from her bank, then immediately called the note due. Her car loans, credit cards, and personal debts followed. Within a week, Joan Macias went from successful real estate agent to bankruptcy candidate. When she called Roland, begging for mercy, his response was ice cold. You should have thought about consequences before you tried to destroy an innocent man's life. His second target was Patrick Hayes, a general contractor who had been feeding information to Brenda about Roland's current projects. Patrick had been hoping to steal contracts once Roland's company collapsed from federal investigations. Roland's revenge was more creative. He purchased the company that supplied Patrick with construction materials, then systematically delayed deliveries, raised prices, and created supply chain problems that caused Patrick's projects to run late and over budget. Simultaneously, Roland reached out to Patrick's clients with better bids and faster completion times. Within a month, Patrick lost 3 major contracts worth over $2 million. It's like someone's sabotaging my business, Patrick complained to mutual associates, not knowing that Roland owned the very companies causing his problems. But the most satisfying target was Edwin McGee, a mutual friend who had known about Brenda's affair and actively encouraged her to take Roland for everything he's worth in the divorce. Edwin owned a small construction firm that competed directly with Roland for municipal contracts. For years, he'd been underbidding Roland by cutting safety corners and using substandard materials. Roland's revenge was poetic justice. He anonymously tipped city inspectors to Edwin's safety violations, provided documentation of substandard materials used in municipal buildings, and revealed Edwin's practice of bribing low-level city officials for inside information about upcoming contracts. Unlike the false evidence Brenda had fabricated against Roland, Edwin's violations were real and extensive. The city launched a comprehensive investigation that revealed years of corner-cutting, safety violations, and corruption. Edwin McGee lost his contractor's license, faced criminal charges for bribery, and watched his company dissolve in a storm of lawsuits from clients whose buildings failed safety inspections. Someone's got it out for me, Edwin told anyone who would listen, still not understanding that his downfall was orchestrated by the man he'd tried to help destroy. Meanwhile, Doug Stark was learning what it meant to be owned by Roland Pierce. I need you to do something for me, Roland told him during a private meeting. What? Gregory Blake's sentencing hearing is next month. I want you to provide testimony about his gambling habits, his debts, his desperation for money. I don't know anything about Gregory's gambling. You will, by the time you testify, you're going to become very familiar with his personal problems. Doug stared at Roland with growing horror. You want me to lie under oath? I want you to research Gregory Blake thoroughly and provide accurate testimony about what you discover. If your research reveals gambling problems, that's not my fault. And if I refuse? Roland's smile was thin and cold. Then I start collecting my debt in less pleasant ways. Doug spent the following weeks becoming an expert on Gregory Blake's financial destruction, gathering information that would ensure the maximum possible prison sentence. But Roland's most comprehensive revenge was reserved for the business community that had been waiting to feast on his company's corpse. When news of the federal investigation first broke, several competitors had immediately contacted Roland's clients, suggesting they might want to consider more stable contractors for future projects. Roland made a list of every company that had tried to capitalize on his apparent downfall, then systematically destroyed them. His methods varied. Sometimes he outbid them on contracts with prices so low they couldn't compete, then used his superior efficiency to still turn a profit. Sometimes he hired away their best employees with substantial salary increases. Sometimes he bought out their suppliers and created the same supply chain problems he'd used against Patrick Hayes. One competitor found himself under federal investigation for tax evasion after Roland anonymously provided documentation of unreported income. Another lost his city contracts when Roland revealed safety violations that had been overlooked for years. Roland's message was clear. Attacking Pierce Construction had consequences that extended far beyond simple business competition. By December, 6 months after Keith's graduation dinner speech, Roland's enemies were either in prison, facing criminal charges, or professionally destroyed. His business had not only survived the federal investigation, but emerged stronger, with new contracts and an enhanced reputation for integrity. But he wasn't finished yet. The most important target remained: Gregory Blake himself. Gregory's cooperation with federal prosecutors had earned him a reduced sentence recommendation, but he was still facing 3 years in federal prison. Roland intended to make sure those 3 years felt like 30. Through his connections in the construction industry, Roland knew people who knew people. Prison was full of contractors, electricians, and construction workers who had run afoul of the law. Men who understood the value of loyalty and the price of betrayal. Gregory Blake would enter prison as a marked man, surrounded by inmates who knew exactly what he'd done to Roland Pierce. His cooperation with prosecutors wouldn't protect him from the justice of men who understood that betraying a stand-up contractor was unforgivable. Roland made certain phone calls, transferred certain funds, and ensured that Gregory's prison experience would be appropriately educational. "What happens to him in there isn't my responsibility," Roland told Marcus Webb. "But I want to make sure the right people know his story." By Christmas, the transformation was complete. Roland Pierce had emerged from his wife's betrayal not as a victim, but as a force of nature. His enemies were scattered, destroyed, or imprisoned. His business was stronger than ever. His son respected him more than ever. And Brenda, awaiting sentencing in county jail, finally understood the true nature of the man she'd married and tried to destroy. She'd thought she was betraying a simple contractor who got lucky. She'd actually declared war on a force of nature who never forgot, never forgave, and never lost. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. 6 months later, Roland Pierce stood in federal court as Brenda received her sentence. 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and fraud. She looked small and broken in her orange jumpsuit, a far cry from the confident woman who had yanked Keith's speech notes away at that graduation dinner. Keith sat beside his father in the gallery, now 22 and working as a junior engineer at Pierce Construction. The young man had testified truthfully during the trial, describing his mother's affair and the evidence fabrication plot with clinical precision. The defendant's actions represent a fundamental breach of trust, Judge Andres Lowe declared. She not only betrayed her marriage vows, but attempted to use federal law enforcement as a weapon against an innocent man. This court finds her crimes particularly egregious, given the premeditation and scope of the conspiracy. Brenda's new attorney, a public defender named Lewis Marshall, had argued for leniency based on emotional distress and poor judgment. The judge wasn't impressed. "Mrs. Pierce, you had numerous opportunities to reconsider your actions. Instead, you escalated your criminal behavior, involving multiple co-conspirators and creating elaborate fabrications designed to destroy your husband's life and livelihood." As Brenda was led away in shackles, she caught Roland's eye one final time. He stared back with complete indifference, as if she were a stranger. Gregory Blake had been sentenced the previous month to 4 years in federal prison. Despite his cooperation with prosecutors, the judge had been influenced by testimony about his character, his gambling debts, and his willingness to fabricate evidence for personal gain. Doug Stark's testimony had been particularly damaging, describing Gregory as a desperate man willing to commit any crime for money. What the court didn't know was that Doug's research had been guided by Roland's investigators, ensuring maximum impact. Gregory's prison experience had been exactly as unpleasant as Roland intended. Within his first month, he'd been beaten twice by inmates who had connections to Seattle's construction community. The message was clear: betraying Roland Pierce had consequences that extended beyond legal proceedings. After the sentencing, Roland and Keith drove to a cemetery outside Seattle, where they stood beside a simple gravestone marked William Pierce, 1943 to 2003. "Grandpa would have been proud of how you handled this," Keith said, placing flowers on his grandfather's grave. Roland nodded. His father had been a union carpenter who'd taught him that a man's word was his bond and betrayal was unforgivable. He always said that if someone tries to destroy you, you have two choices: let them succeed or make sure they regret it forever. What about forgiveness? Forgiveness is for people who make mistakes and try to make amends. Your mother didn't make a mistake. She made a calculated decision to destroy everything I built. That's not something you forgive. That's something you punish. Keith understood. At 22, he learned hard lessons about loyalty, consequences, and the difference between justice and revenge. That evening, they returned to Roland's house, now truly his alone, after Brenda forfeited all claims in her plea agreement. Keith had moved back in after college, finding that he enjoyed working alongside his father and learning the construction business from the ground up. The house felt different now, brighter, somehow, without the underlying tension that had poisoned the atmosphere during Brenda's final years of betrayal. Roland's phone rang. Marcus Webb's name appeared on the screen. "Boss, I've got an update on the others." "Tell me." "Joan Macias filed for bankruptcy last week. Lost her house, cars, everything. She's working a retail job for minimum wage. Patrick Hayes closed his business. He's working for someone else now, hourly wages. His wife filed for divorce when the money ran out. Edwin McGee, 3 years in state prison for bribery and fraud. His company's assets were seized to pay for repairing all the municipal buildings he screwed up." Roland nodded with satisfaction. "Anyone else on the list?" "Sally Clay sends her regards. She's doing well with the real estate firm you recommended." Sally had been rewarded for her loyalty with introductions to high-end clients and exclusive listings. Her income had tripled since helping Roland expose Brenda's plans. "And Doug, still making payments on his debt to you. He's been very cooperative, very respectful. I think he finally understands who he was dealing with." Doug Stark had become a model debtor, working 2 jobs and turning over every spare dollar to Roland. More importantly, he'd become a cautionary tale in Seattle's business community about the consequences of betraying Roland Pierce. 2 years later, Roland Pierce stood in another hotel ballroom, this time watching his son Keith receive an engineering award for innovative bridge design. At 24, Keith had already made his mark in the construction industry, earning respect through talent rather than family connections. The young man's acceptance speech was brief and professional, thanking his mentors and colleagues. But when he finished, he looked directly at his father and nodded once. Roland understood. This was what real success looked like: achievement earned through honest work, respect gained through competence, and loyalty given freely rather than demanded. In the audience, Roland recognized several familiar faces: business associates, city officials, fellow contractors, men who had learned to respect Roland Pierce not just for his wealth, but for his unwavering principles and his absolute commitment to justice. Some of them had tried to take advantage of his apparent weakness during the federal investigation. They'd all learned the same lesson: Roland Pierce was not a man to be underestimated or betrayed. After the ceremony, father and son drove through the city Roland had helped build. Construction cranes bearing the Pierce Construction logo dotted the skyline, testament to a company that had not just survived betrayal, but emerged stronger. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mom had just been honest about the affair? Keith asked. Roland considered the question. If she'd come to me directly, admitted the truth, asked for a divorce, we probably could have worked out something reasonable. I might have been hurt, but I wouldn't have destroyed her. What made the difference? She didn't just leave me. She tried to destroy me. She fabricated evidence, involved federal agents, recruited conspirators. She turned a personal betrayal into a criminal conspiracy. And you don't forgive that. Ever. Roland's voice was flat and final. Your mother learned what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. She thought she could manipulate me because I loved her. She was wrong. They pulled into the driveway of Roland's house, now expanded with a new wing where Keith lived independently while working for the family business. 3 generations of Pierce men had learned the same lesson. Success came through hard work, integrity, and the wisdom to distinguish between friends and enemies. That night, Roland sat in his study, reviewing contracts for next year's projects. Pierce Construction was bidding on a new federal courthouse, a project worth $50 million. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same government that had investigated him based on fabricated evidence would now pay him to build their courthouse. His phone buzzed with a text from Keith, working late again. Some things never change. Roland smiled and typed back. Good habits are worth keeping. But some things had changed. Roland no longer worked late to escape from problems at home. He worked late because he loved what he did, because building things gave his life meaning, and because success was the best revenge against everyone who had ever doubted him. Brenda would serve another 3 years in federal prison, followed by supervised probation. Gregory Blake had 2 years remaining on his sentence, assuming he survived the experience. Doug Stark would be paying off his debt for another 8 years, a constant reminder of the price of betrayal. And Roland Pierce would continue building, growing, succeeding. Not because he needed revenge anymore, but because that's who he was, a man who never backed down, never gave up, and never forgot the difference between loyalty and treachery. The graduation dinner speech that had changed everything was now just a memory. But its lesson remained. Truth has consequences, and some people learn them the hard way. Roland Pierce had built his empire with his hands, defended it with his mind, and preserved it with his unwavering commitment to justice. He never needed anyone's forgiveness, and he never granted it to those who didn't deserve it. In the end, that's what separated winners from losers. The wisdom to know when mercy was strength and when it was weakness. Roland Pierce had learned that lesson long ago, and he'd never forgotten it. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.